Hey there, and welcome to Be the CEO of Your Life podcast. I'm your host, Olga Lacroix, a mom, a former therapist, a certified coach, and a mindfulness teacher. I am here to share valuable tips and insights for all of you mothers and busy women out there. Why? My goal to help you take care of your mental well-being without sacrificing your life of accomplishments. Whether you are juggling family, career, or personal growth, this podcast is your go-to resource for becoming the best version of yourself. Let's dive in and start mastering the art of balance together. Welcome, my friends, to episode of Be the CEO of Your Life. I am sitting across from a CEO of his life. You know what I was thinking about, Alain? You have many roles in my life. You're my husband's good friend.
Mm-hmm.
You are my good friend's husband. And you're like my friend. I also think of you as my friend. I don't think I've ever interviewed somebody in the podcast who I can have like three different connections to that are
Mm.
meaningful to me. So I know him, as I just said, a friend, a dad, and also as a professional who I admire. And your most recent articles and posts that you've been putting on LinkedIn really made me think of, we have to have you in the podcast talking to anybody else who's thinking about their own leadership, who are in leadership positions. And so I'm just here to pick your brain, to have a good conversation, and hopefully the audience gets to feel enriched after our conversation.
Mm-hmm.
So to everybody else, my friend is Alain Hyppolite. Did I mess it up? I said it good. He's a provocative thought leader, change catalyst. With his bold and at times controversial voice, he reminds leaders and business that business can be kind and that quiet people are powerful.
Mm.
Welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. I'm super excited to do this. And yeah, we've known each other for such a long time. And I admire you as well. And yeah, it's a conversation amongst friends.
Yeah, yeah. So I was having supper before recording, and I'm thinking like, where did this all started for you? Like, how did like this quiet, like that's what you've been sort of like branding for yourself and
Mhm.
voicing is there is power in this in quiet leadership. There is power in silence. As a coach, this is what we also talk about, preach about, and as a coach, we stay quiet 80% of the time in a session.
Mm.
Like so silence is something that I personally love, see the benefits. And yet in leadership, I feel, or in even social interactions, I feel that is not something that we humans have a tendency to feel comfortable with or allow time for. So just bring me to the background of what happened to you in your profession that has brought life to this idea of quiet, powerful leadership.
Amazing, amazing. Yeah, it's not really linear, right? I'd like to think there's just one thing that kind of led me to where I am today. I think I've been empowered to share a bit of my thinking over the last year or so. But the truth is, I've been in leadership roles for the better part of like the last almost 15 years.
Wow.
And I think it's a lot of my thinking is obviously shaped by my own experiences with some amazing leaders, but also some not so amazing leaders. Um, but I think I'd be remiss not to say that part of it is, shaped by my own like childhood, early adulthood, and feeling a bit um, at odds feeling a bit like an outsider. I didn't really understand myself, and I did a lot of self-work to, just kind of discover who I am, and even this idea of like introversion.
Mm.
Uh, that's a fairly recent, concept that I was introduced to somewhat early in my career, but I didn't know I was an introvert my entire life. So today, here I am sharing like ideas around the value of kindness, the value of like a quiet, calm, subtle approach in leadership. And I'm super excited to see how, one, it resonates with so many people. My content is picking up some traction. But I realize I'm speaking to a pretty significant segment of the population. There's a lot of people that see themselves as introverts, um, and that feel that leadership needs to change a little. So that's my message.
Hmm. Okay. So my coaching brain goes into like, I've already zoomed into part of your story. Bear
Okay.
with me. So you felt like an outsider.
Hmm.
Was it because you felt like you were more quiet? Like what in leadership made you feel like I don't belong here? Or to use your words, an outsider.
Yeah. I think there's naturally, I think humans we tend to reward loud personalities. I heard recently Adam Grant, he aptly referred to it as like the Babel effect. And it's the more vocal you are, the more your ideas kind of get elevated, and the more you're apt to be recognized and potentially obtain opportunities and be identified as a leader. And really early in my career, I realized um, I needed time to kind of digest. I needed time to digest things. I wasn't necessarily always the quickest on my feet, but also, and most importantly, I found it draining to talk. I found it draining to like my social battery would exhaust very quickly if I spend too much energy in certain settings. And my colleagues uh, some of my colleagues elevated, not because they had the best ideas, but because they were the first to talk. And so I often felt, a bit of an outsider. And I recognized also that some of the most brilliant individuals that I know, they might not be leaders today, but they're individual contributors. They're amazing at what they do. They have a lot of potential. They can create space for others to contribute and all of those things. And they wouldn't necessarily get noticed because they're not loud and take space in meetings, and they don't self-promote and advocate for themselves. So I think there's some work that us introverts need to do to kind of correct that behavior and announce ourselves. But at the same time, I don't think we need to compensate or try to become somebody that we're not. There's nothing wrong with being quiet. There's nothing wrong with being a bit more pensive. There's nothing wrong with trying to manage your energy.
Hmm. Yeah, I coach quite a few introverts who I think after those meetings, if especially if they stayed in their neutral state of I'm quiet, I'm taking it in, I'm thinking, they will walk away from those meetings feeling like, what is wrong with me? How come I
Mm,
couldn't talk? Or frustrated, like they do all the work. They're the brain behind the work, and somebody else gives the presentation and they get all the credit. So, Mike, I'm often coaching on that frustration that might come because they do want to be noticed or recognized or validated like every human on the work that they do. And yet, yeah, there is like a gap in between like having had a great idea and not having communicated it out loud, yet having executed the job. So for those people, what do you have to tell them? Like what will you advise, suggest?
and that's definitely something I struggled with as well. What I would say is, one, me being on this podcast, Olga, a few years ago, I would have never imagined that would have been my experience, number one. I think there's a misconception that we also tend to believe. It's that we're not the greatest public speakers. Um, Large settings are uncomfortable for us. We're shy, we're antisocial, and it's just not true. The way I like to kind of explain it to people is, we have this glass of water, and every interaction is a sip of that glass of water. So by the end of the day, we have to make sure there's still a bit of water in that glass of water. And every interaction is a sip. Every interaction is a sip of that water. For an extrovert, by the way, like I'm explaining this in a very binary way. I think it's much more complex than that. The concept itself is like over 100 years old. I think it was Carl Jung that kind of, introduced it to the world. I got exposed through it through like Myers-Briggs testing and those kinds of framework in the workplace. But for me, like an extrovert is the opposite of what I described earlier. They wake up, their glass of water is pretty low, and the more interactions they have, the more it gets filled. And
Right.
so, as an introvert, if you're in a setting where potentially you need to contribute, you just need to kind of pick your spots. You need to figure out what your presentation style is like. You need to figure out what kind of settings you prefer to contribute in and kind of lean in on that. You also have to recognize that introvert or extrovert or ambivert, which is kind of in between, you'll have to self-promote. I know it sounds cheap, especially if you pride yourself as a humble and modest person. It sounds really cheap, right? This idea of like you need to promote yourself and have an elevator pitch. Not necessarily. You can kind of sell your ideas instead of selling yourself, but you definitely have to advocate for yourself in some shape or form. So to the people who feel like talking about themselves is uncomfortable, or
Yep.
you need to find a way to do that in a way that is comfortable to you. That would be the simplest way for me to describe it without
Yeah.
like, that one-on-one conversation with someone.
Hmm. Okay. I also appreciate the distinction between somebody who's shy and who would be terrified perhaps of public speaking versus somebody who feels simply drained by doing it, like
Mm,
as you're describing it, right? So not everybody who is an introvert is also shy. It's not the shyness that will stop an introvert from doing a public talk or a presentation, but the feeling after, like what it takes, like the amount of energy, and if you don't have that energy on a particular day. So you said you've been in management for 15 years, more or less,
mhm,
and you've been learning about yourself and you've been exposed to people who have helped you, and sounds like personality tests and probably some self-development along with that that has helped you figure out who you are, what you need, and yet still move up. So how did you start with that self-promotion that you just mentioned, the advocating for yourself? How did you not let sort of like, you also work in an environment, you're a public servant, so you work in an environment that doesn't change. It is, for the most part, it's a system like corporate America. Like there is a way of doing things and operating, but government, especially, like any change takes, you know, way longer than in the private sector. And yet you moved even feeling as an outsider at times, even not meeting like the criteria of like those who speak first, move up or elevate higher. What has been your inner work, or what has made it possible for you?
I think there's several things. That's a really powerful question, Olga. Yeah, I've definitely grown. I've definitely grown as a person. I would say uh, if I was to pick out one thing, the single most important thing is to still find a way to build meaningful relationships. I think that's probably the thing that's helped me throughout my career, and strategizing around that, building the right network, building the relationships with decision makers that you need to, and finding a way to showcase your work in whatever setting is comfortable for you. And so for me, what that meant is I knew if I went to a large networking event or a large conference, that's not where I'm going to shine. That's not where I'm necessarily the most at ease. I'm much more comfortable in a one-on-one setting with someone, something like this. And I would say, in fact, right now, introverts were kind of at an advantage because, coffee chats like this are very much normalized today, and they're pretty much the standard. And one-on-one settings, one-on-one conversations, it's a little uncomfortable reaching out to certain people, especially people in um, decision-making positions. But I think finding a way to build those relationships, I would argue, is probably the single most important thing. But I think there's also other ways to, again, showcase your work and showcase your know-how, showcase your competencies, and understand that, yes, you might not be the quickest to speak up in a meeting, but you may be able to kind of close the loop on an item really well in written fashion. And some of your work can speak for you that way. And then last but not least, I would say in the last year and a half, 2 years, I've embarked on this journey of personal branding. And I'm not really a fan of the term personal branding because it sounds like really packaged. It sounds like a product that I'm trying to sell. I think really I'm working on my reputation.
Mm.
And for me, what that means is in a digital world, I'm doing that online. I'm building a platform online and on LinkedIn, of course, as you talked about earlier. But also even before that, again, working on building that reputation also in person and really trying to put some thought, some intentionality behind that and what that looks like. And so saying loud and clear, hey, I'm introverted. Hey, I need some time to think this through. Hey, you know what? I prefer to connect in a one-on-one setting. Saying those things and kind of establishing those boundaries have made it easier for me to navigate certain environments.
Hmm. What has made it possible for you to feel comfortable saying, let's do that at a one-on-one meeting versus like what about this personal branding journey, which I get it. I understand both of your feelings. I don't like the name or the title of like going out there and branding myself. And yet um I've also found it is a process that's helped me really dissect who it is that I am, my vision, my mission, what I stand for, to make that voice even more stronger. So it's a journey. I like it. And what's made it possible even for you to do that? You said a year ago you wouldn't even sit in this podcast to talk to me because, we know there is minimum 4,000 downloads a month of our episodes. Should have maybe told you that.
Amazing. Amazing.
uh,
No pressure.
but yeah, no pressure. But right, you wouldn't have sat here. You wouldn't have maybe entertained that idea of doing a personal branding. The name may have just turned you off, or telling somebody like that human connection that you're talking about at your comfort, where you call the shots, where you say, "This is what I need," so it's coming. It's gonna be this way. It's gonna be
Mhm.
at a one-on-one. What's made that shift for you?
What empowered me to do that? That's something I'm still trying to figure out. Again, it's hard to single out one event.
Mhm.
Uh, in terms of personal branding, I would say the the thing that often kind of imprisons our minds is this idea that things have to be perfect,
Mhm.
this fear that especially if you're building in public, especially if you're building in public on social media, you know, when watch a big creator, uh, it seems like they've got their shit together, right? It seems like everything is just perfectly packaged and they've got it all figured out.
Mm.
And then you quickly realize they don't. And for me, one of the things that I discovered in my journey was like, well, you know what? Some of these creators, some of the people that are building a brand and networking massively online, they don't have it all figured out. It's an incremental approach. They embrace this idea of like being imperfectionists. They embrace this idea of like constantly iterating and evolving. And I do that in my day-to-day work. So somehow I let go of that. I took the handcuffs off my wrists, and I feel really comfortable building in public today. Uh, I would say that would be a starting point for anyone that's trying to build a brand. At the same time, I would argue that again, I don't necessarily I'm not in love with the word or the term personal branding, but you need a reputation. And in 2024, I guarantee you, if you apply for a job elsewhere or anywhere really, or if you want to get a client, you want to work with a client, um, they're going to Google you. They're going to take your name, they're going to put it in Google, and they're going to Google you. And that is your opportunity to control the narrative on you. It's either that or you let them make up, an idea about you, or worse, somebody else controls the narrative on you, a previous employer, through reference systems, or former colleagues who may have a good impression of you or a bad one. And so a personal brand really allows you to control that. And so for me, that was a really empowering idea that I get to control what people think about me, and I market myself in the right way.
So to be for the audience, you're talking about your LinkedIn profile. That is how you're like your personal brand, how you are controlling the narrative currently is through posting content, creating content, posting it on LinkedIn. I've seen you write articles, showing up on podcasts whenever as often as you can. Is that what you're is there anything else that you are talking about?
So for me, yeah, for me, definitely it's posting content, sharing some really um, dear ideas to me on leadership and on introversion and on kindness in business. But if that's not the path that you want to take and you don't want to post content, you don't have to do that. But you have to figure out how you're going to build relationships in a digital fashion, figure out how you're going to design your profile, how you're going to, create a bit of a presentation of yourself online.
Hmm. Interesting for me is that if this was uncomfortable a year ago and you're here today and you did talk about that metaphor of like you took the cuffs out of your wrists and it was a multiple I like that. Sometimes we think like this great thing happened and suddenly my mind changed. And you do refer to multiple events. Um it's possible. Right? Like change is possible. That's all we know. Including that branding is evolving with you, alongside you. Like it is as human as you are. So it's in constant change. Uh Mention maybe one of the multiple events that sort of allow you to arrive to this freedom of doing this kind of stuff.
One event, sheesh, look at you with the tough questions. I would say um, I I did a bit of research on because again, my focus was really about sharing my ideas. And actually, let me take you back a little further. I've been wanting to share these ideas for a really long time. Again, I was in prison. I was worried about, the watchful eye of the public and being judged and all of these things. And so I had been flirting with the idea of putting content out there for the last, 3, 4 years, truly. During the pandemic, I was on parental leave with our first child, who you know very well. And when I was on parental leave with her, I was like, I've got some time on my hands, some free time on my hand. Both me and my partner were on leave. And so we were kind of sharing the love. And so when I had a bit of time, I was like very um encouraged to share some of my thoughts. And I never did. I never pursued the idea. And so if you fast forward 3 years later, in March last year, when I started putting content out there, um, throughout that time, I think one of the things that kind of opened my eyes was, again, this idea of like not being a perfectionist. But I would see content and it was very lean, it was very small, and it was never the most grandiose thing. It was just well packaged, it was well thought out. And so I did a bit of research and I found out simple things like the average user on LinkedIn looks at a post for about 8 seconds. So they don't want to see anything that's verbose or long or wordy. They just want really digestible and easy to understand ideas. There's another concept that's called Flesh Kincaid, which is like a readability, the US readability levels. And the suggestion from a user experience is that you try and keep the language to fifth to eighth grade reading level. And it doesn't matter the audience's education level and sophistication. It's just that if you want them to consume your content in a fast way, you got to make it simple and lean. So I think that also kind of allowed me to put some stuff out there. I was like, it doesn't have to be complicated. It doesn't have to be
Right.
sophisticated. It doesn't have to be crazy. It's just got to be simple, touching, meaningful. And so there I was. There I felt more comfortable putting some stuff out there.
That makes sense. So yeah, the brain was making it sound like, well, you better be, you know, overly or perfect. And doing research took that away.
Mm,
That's awesome. It's great to see the evolution from the outside. And
thanks.
I think recently you posted like what like how that for those of you who care about numbers, how you started a year ago, as you said, and the amount of impressions and the amount of following or interactions, how that has increased. One concept as you're talking that is coming into my mind, which I played with what in pandemic too, when I three of my well my main three coaching programs slash teaching programs were born in pandemic.
Mm,
Because I had a 4-month-old baby and nobody wanted to be coach. People were like, oh, we don't know what's happening with the world. So although we would need your assistance right now to not freak out, we will save our money. And so I was very creative and I put all my thoughts into curriculums and video classes. And I matched that with coaching as a group. So it was affordable for people. And
mm,
I struggled. I don't know if you remember, I had braces and I had just given birth. So I wasn't happy with my body, with my face, with like my mouth. And these are video, I'm good on video. I know I'm good on video. And I'm like, it's not perfect. And I was sleep deprived. So I'll forget words. I'm like searching for my words. It was far, far from perfect.
mm.
And yet I thought, well, this is either in my brain or out there doing something. And that's when I made that shift to just put it out there. And I just revamped it this past year. So we have all new videos. I took all the vintage Olga's out. Like these are all new videos, no braces, no sleep deprived phase, uh, no postpartum face and body and hormones and all of that. And in the meantime, there would have been hundreds of people that would have not received that information, whose lives would have not been impacted. And so I think this is so special when we get out of our own heads, like you said, and we face that freedom, we gift something to our community, whether that's in your workplace, by talking or by expressing your idea or executing your plan, your thoughts in the way that, as you mentioned, the person feels comfortable. Once it's out of your brain, then it's a gift to whoever is receiving that, whoever that speaks to.
I love that.
That's how I got out of like imperfection. It's like, it's not for me. Who cares what I look like? Is the message. Like, if that's helping somebody, like, just give it out. Uh,
I I love that. If I can add to that too, I
yeah.
would say, yeah, it's an amazing descriptor. Like it's a present to the world.
Mm-hmm.
And just around that, one of my realizations over the last little while is your audience isn't necessarily looking, to your point, for something extravagant. Your audience is probably somebody that's got 2 years less of experience than you. And if you shared what you knew, you would accelerate their learnings. Your audience is yourself a few years ago.
Right.
So if you think about it that way, you're not necessarily um, positioning yourself as an expert or as like, the single source of truth on a topic. You're really positioning yourself as somebody that can help because you've gone through certain experiences, because you have some credible experiences, um, just from your own kind of journey. And
Mm-hmm.
so that's also empowering because I think sometimes we, again, because we want to be perfectionists, you're like, I'm not going to write until I become Shakespeare, or I'm not going to paint until I'm Picasso. Well, guess what? If you're not going to paint until you're Picasso, you're never going to become Picasso because
No, yeah. Where's the practice? Yeah.
you've never practiced.
How has this impacted your day-to-day work? So how many people are you leading today? Like your teams are how large?
Yeah, so I over the course of my career, it's changed. But recently, I have a team of about 80 people I'm working with, and it's it's really like one just from a writing standpoint. I think in terms of building my personal brand, it's really helped me. But around the especially the concept of introversion and quiet leadership, I think it really resonates with people. And I think again, a lot of the people that identify as, you know, quieter and introvert, they're really empowered. They see it as motivating. And I think they see a potential path for themselves into a leadership role, whereas potentially before that, they never would have even thought about.
Wow.
So
Yes.
I think it's inspiring some people, and I'm like that's one of the most fulfilling part of this journey for me is getting people to kind of see a bit of the talent in themselves and dispelling a bit of the myths, and at the same time smashing those self-imposed ceilings, right?
That is the gift, right? That's the gift you're giving to people by letting your thoughts be experienced by
Mm.
others. You found a way to do that that felt good for you. Talk to me about kindness and business. You've had a quote recently I loved. It's good to be a bad boss. That's the easiest thing. But it is really difficult to be a kind one or a good one. Tell me a little bit about your evolution. Like what is your leadership style? Like what's been that journey like for you?
I would love to say that throughout my career I've only had amazing leaders who like have inspired me to do the right thing.
You wouldn't be
But
here. You wouldn't be here. You wouldn't be doing this, I believe, if that was true.
at all, and it's probably the one of the ideas that's like dearest to me is this idea that like in order to shape your thinking and perspective, you need to sometimes uh, deal with some absolute BS. And for me, it was some of those difficult moments that kind of shaped my thinking, but also reminded me that when it was going to be my turn, I would never do certain things as a leader. And I would say that really early in my journey, I would mimic some of these attitudes that I saw sometimes in a workplace. There's this, I think, prototype of what a leader is. If you look at like any movie in North America, the boss, right? This like notion of the boss, they're alpha and they present a certain way, and they say no more often than they say yes, and they're very difficult and they give tough love, and there's a lot of people that behave like that in the workplace. And what I realize is for a lot of people, currency, like the thing that inspires them to actually deliver is a bit of humanity, a bit of love, a lot of empathy. And my idea around kindness in business isn't necessarily, this peace and love thing, or like, you have to be a nice guy, Mr. Nice Guy. Not at all. You still have to be firm. You
Mm.
still have to sometimes make some very difficult decisions, but you understand that you still need to treat people like people. You understand that you still need to appreciate that people have real lives, real things going on for them, and they're not just a name on a spreadsheet or a name on a report. They've got like, another half life that they live outside of the office. And so when you recognize that, you treat them a little differently and they show up for you. And you never have to worry about underperformance, or maybe a little less. You don't have to worry about underperformance as much because you know what? They're committed to you. And it's also this idea that it's not just with your team, but it's also with your colleagues. And so this idea of goodwill, right? I often allude to like this example of like if you go to a restaurant and the waitress or the waiter is unkind to you, chances are you won't be compelled to give them a great tip. And on the other hand, if you're unkind to the waiter or the waitress, chances are you won't get the greatest service. And so if
Right.
they want their tip and you want great service, treat each other with some level of respect. And that to me is to illustrate like that's business, whether it's with a client, a colleague, someone you report to, or someone that reports to you.
Hmm. Yeah, to remember. I like that idea of there's more than the face that you see at work. Or
Mm,
like they have a life. Ideally, they have a life outside of work, and we're encouraging that. You often talk about that life balance. Your emails are always finished with these are the hours I work, but you do you. You work the hours that give you balance. I am very curious as somebody in the private sector. And this, I don't know from other countries, maybe in the US less. I don't know. We've got people listening from all over the world. One of the reasons I love the podcast. We are sending information to just about every country.
mm.
When when in the private sector in Canada, anyways, we look at government employees and we're like, everybody's following the same. It feels as though everybody's doing the same things. There is very little opportunity to do things differently.
Mm.
And I hear you talking, I'm like, wow, uh that sounds like you're bringing novelty or
Yep.
you like you said controversy to maybe how things normally are. And I'm not saying that everybody has to have the same leadership style, but we do come from a leadership style where it's performance appraisals and it's like you're not doing this right. This is the job. Like you got to do it the right way, or else you're out. So how have you navigated? And you can obviously correct me and say that's not how it works, Olga. Right? It's just you in private sector thinking that's how it works, and maybe that's how we work in private sector too, right? Like we're like every dollar counts. So we're like everybody has to be in their best. We want them in their best, doing the best job. At least this is how I hire people. What do you love doing? Give me that. Like I will match their skills to the task.
Mm.
That's simple as my assistant. She used to do some social media. She hated it. I'm like, hey, that's out of your tasks
Expertise.
of jobs because that's not the energy I even want. Like what she's great at other things. And so that's what I've given her. How is your understanding of leadership? I mean, even curious if culture plays a role here for you. I know it does for me. Like my own, whatever I bring to the table is a bit different because of my undeniable influence of like having my parents be from different countries. And I lived outside of Canada for, you know, I've been here longer now, but I feel South American mostly. And that impacts a bit of how I think of
Sure.
leadership and how I come into the table and how I share thoughts. So how have you navigated sort of like this mainstream way of doing things within government and your ideology that's maybe a bit different, maybe it's not, maybe you're going to tell me like everybody goes or thinks the way I do, but I do think that you are a thought leader in the sense that you're not following what's happening. So how are you mirroring these two things or three if we bring culture in?
No, I love that. I love this element of culture, and I would be a really bad liar if I didn't um, admit that it's as a first generation child of immigrants. For sure, my experiences, my perspectives are shaped by my parents' experience. There's like this element of duality, and I know you can totally relate to this. On one hand, when I'm at home with my family, I belong to one culture, and when I step outside of the home, I belong to another culture altogether. I would say it's also it would be unfair for me not to talk, there's definitely some linkages to like when I talk about work-life balance, there's a lot of linkages to, um, uh, class structure, but also capitalism and stuff. But we don't have to get into all that because those are some pretty radical ideas I embrace. But I will tell you this, my style is definitely unconventional. And in my experience in government, there's some really brilliant minds. There's some really brilliant, hardworking folks. And I think there's this misconception that in government, people work a 9 to 5 and it's very gray, very dull, very kind of repeated. It's kind of repetitive. It's almost like a how would I describe that? I guess like we can edit this shit.
Factory workers, that's from the outside what we, like they come in. I'm not talking about you specifically, but the image outside would be, I don't know if this is what you're trying to say. Come
Yeah,
in, do the same work every day and leave. Don't ask questions. Don't bring anything new to the table. I know that's not how it is, but is that what you were trying to, like, that's
yeah,
the image?
yeah. It's we can edit this, right? We
Oh
can
yeah,
edit.
yeah. Yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
Yeah, so I would say it's almost like yeah, like it's people do the bare minimum. People just show up and go home. And I would say it's totally not true. I would say, in fact, things have been, there's always been some really high performers that pride themselves on working really hard and long
Mm.
hours. And that's been exacerbated, especially by the pandemic, right? This pandemic allowed us to discover this newfound productivity that never existed, prior to the pandemic. Now, if you're in the office at home and you want to go to the washroom, it's literally a couple steps away. You want to go and grab a lunch, it's a couple steps away as well. And so there's less interruptions to your day. You can be on as soon as you wake up and, stay on until you're tired and want to, close the lid on that laptop. So there's some really hardworking people, and I think now, the conversations around burnout are happening even more because people just can't disconnect.
Yeah.
But I'll say this just around my unconventional style.
Yeah.
I think leadership needs to change. The simplest way to put it is I recognize leadership needs to change. The criteria, the requirement, the standards that we've established as a society for leadership um, don't sit well with me. Again, I talked about we elevate the wrong people earlier. I talked about we give place to the loudest voice, the loudest personalities, and not always the most empathetic people, the people who think about their peers and their colleagues as humans rather than just numbers. So I think there's kind of a balance to be struck. And so for me, I guess the notion that I'm putting forward is leadership needs to change.
What has been the reception of that message that you're putting forward?
I think it's quite radical. I'm one that I'm passionate about my ideas, but they're bendable ideas, and I pride myself on being able to kind of evolve and adapt. So I'm not married to this idea. It's how I feel today. It's well received on social media so far. I've grown a lot. I've picked up a lot of momentum. But I also recognize people can see this as heavy criticism of themselves, right? People currently in leadership
Mm.
roles can see this as a criticism of how they lead, of how they organize themselves, and how they push things forward. But I do think concepts like emotional intelligence, uh, they can't be seen as when you talk about emotional intelligence and empathy, it can't be seen as weakness. It in no circle should it be seen as weakness. I think you're a weak person if that's how you think. And so I would like to think there's some appetite for those kinds of ideas. And I'm really optimistic that like with the, renewal of, new generations entering the workplace with new standards and new expectations, I'm hopeful that we'll see uh, uh, um, some more momentum in that direction.
How many of your peers, so other managers at your same level, behave like you do, have that sort of similar style of leadership?
I would say depends. I would like to think uh, I'm not the odd man out. I'm definitely not the odd man out.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, I'd like to think it's also a matter of courage, right? Because I think deep down at the core, some people understand this message. It's just, it's a bit contrarian. It's a bit again, it's a bit radical. And if you don't want to disturb the waters, you try and fit in. You try and
Right.
fit in rather than kind of disturb the waters. But I think it's resonating with quite a few of my peers. I'd like to think I have a lot of allies for sure.
Is there anything in your behavior every day at work that disturbs the water? That is evident. Like, oh, this guy's bringing that idea again, or he's managing his team like these 80 people that way.
Ooh, that's said explicitly to me. I don't think so.
Mhm.
Like again, one thing, one measure for success is, um, to me is, let me rephrase that. You can't deny success. You can't deny the effectiveness of something if it's actually working. And so for me, even if you wanted to um, feel that this approach doesn't work, the truth is engagement is measurable, performance is measurable, things like attendance are measurable. So there are some really clear key performance indicators that signal that this approach is effective. It's not the only one that's effective, but it is effective. And so for now, not too many critics, not too many vocal critics, but I'd like to think again, in all of businesses, whether it's in my industry or not, the truth is you can measure the effectiveness of leadership, right? I think sometimes we have this false belief that we can almost only measure the effectiveness of like individual effort, individual contributors, right? How many calls did you take today? How many emails did you send out? How many clients did you close? How many sales do you have this month? But the truth is, we should have the same kind of performance metrics for leaders. How is your retention?
Mhm.
How is staff engagement? You can measure things like employee sentiment and their trust and belief in leadership. And if they believe leadership is transparent, those things are all measurable. And so I think if there's a criticism of kindness and leadership, uh, you should be able to point to those things.
Hmm. Yeah, I definitely think that measurements for every position is great. Like I set myself goals that can be measured so that I can be accountable. My
Mm,
clients will give surveys about my performance so I can be accountable to myself, to my progress. Like, and I believe this, I wish this for everybody who's in any kind of workforce. Like, be accountable to yourself. Want to improve on how it is that you do your craft, whatever that is, not just because you are accountable to a manager, supervisor, or your team, but to yourself. Right? Like
mm,
this is what I come to do. We work how many hours a day? Some of us spend more time at work than we do with our families.
absolutely.
And so that showing up to the task at hand from a place of criticism is just I think it's a misconception of feedback, right? And an opportunity to grow. So, like you said, anybody who reads your quotes and sees themselves criticized, they're missing the opportunity for growth. They're seeing like, oh, there's a gap between how I behave and what how I could behave. And that's an opportunity, a missed opportunity. So kindness, bringing more humanity, like not like building on those relationships. I was coaching somebody this morning, a director who was telling me highly, she has a PhD on what she does and highly passionate about what she does. And she says, Olga, I'm losing the passion for my job.
Mm,
And we were coaching on like what was that all about? And so what she said, she concluded was, I work at home and there is zero collaboration now.
mm,
Everybody's in their own house, in their own homes, working from home. They work at a place where they could choose to work at the office, but she says even when she does, there's nobody there. People are staying home. And you mentioned also what's happening to burnout. Like now we used to have in Spanish that in psychology the term is canvas. You have a canvas which is home, right? Like and it looks a certain way. And then that canvas changes. And so do you, which is at work. And then you're at the grocery store. Like anywhere you go, it's a change of canvas. Like you're seeing things different. And there are these side effects or like losing while productivity has gone higher in some circumstances, mental health has declined, collaboration has declined. For some environments, for some type of company, that collaboration, like as a social worker, that's key. And when I worked in child protection, having other child protection workers who are doing the job and
Mm.
just coming to a place to be like, that was insane. Having that debrief that was so informal and so healing for the jobs that we were doing. That's sort of like missing now. And you talked about the importance of human connection and like good or bad, but that human connection shapes us. Like you've
Mhm.
had leaders that have taught you what not to do, and you've had some that have inspired you and encouraged you perhaps to do what you're doing now. How are you leading people to, first of all, I don't know what it's like for your work environment. Maybe everybody's at the office, but you did mention like this burnout. Like what is your approach on that? What are your thoughts on collaboration, helping people have that home work balance when all happens at home?
Yeah, listen, I wouldn't be my true self if I wasn't, radical again on this topic.
Mm,
Um, I'll put it this way. I think pre-pandemic, for me, my own like just anecdotal experience was
mm,
there was a clear compartmentalization between work and home, right? And when you were done work, you would get home and that would be it. You may log on to the laptop once in a while, but there was kind of that clear um, line in the sand from work and home, and that allowed I felt for me some better work-life balance. I would also argue that it was probably easier to build relationships for certain people, depending on your style, depending on your personality. For some people, it was probably better. But I think what I'm hell bent on is uh, not being on the wrong side of history. And when I think of this idea of hybrid or remote work, I really enjoy being in the office. I'm in the office probably more than I am at home. I really appreciate it. I love, again, networking and building those relationships. That's very meaningful to me. But I also recognize that for some people, they appreciate the flexibility. They prefer, some people prefer remote work. Some people prefer a mix of both. And of course, like I said, some people prefer in-office only. I think the challenge is not making that determination of which one is better. The challenge is being flexible enough to allow for all of it. And yes, collaboration is not the same, but the work for leaders in 2024 is figuring out how to collaborate in this newfound way of working.
mhm,
So there's a lot of literature, a lot of polling that's been done in North America over the last 3-4 years. And when you asked the average Canadian resident, do they prefer to work at home or in the office? The overwhelming majority said they preferred to work from home. When you ask them, are you more productive working at home or in the office? The overwhelming majority said they were more productive at home. Now, let me be very clear too. Some jobs can't be done remotely. If you're working in construction or um, a wide variety of roles, you just can't do from home. And that's understandable, right? But for the white collar workers, there is a large appetite for remote work. And in fact, it's probably beneficial for employers. There's some clear benefits for employers,
mm,
this kind of collaboration. Like right now, you could be doing this with somebody in San Francisco and somebody in Tokyo and somebody in Beijing. And then there are also obvious benefits for the individual contributors. Uh, Less cost uh, annually in
Yeah.
terms of commute, gas, lunch, clothes, all these things. It's almost like a frictionless experience, right? And so I think the real call to action is how do we make this work? In 100 years ago, when cars were being introduced, I'm sure there were some people on horses and buggies that were going, no, I want to keep my horse and buggy. But the people that were able to adapt said, how are we going to make this work? And so I
Right.
think this is where we are today. We just have to figure out how we're going to make this work. For some people, it's always going to be in the office. And for some people, it's going to be a mix of both. And for some other roles, it will be remote. I think we just have to accept that.
Hmm. Yeah, I've coached a lot. I've come to realize that pretty much everybody I'm coaching is in a management position, which makes sense. Um, Given the nature of my coaching practice. And it's been such a strong subject of conversation, bringing teams back into work. There are resistance. There are sometimes, like you said, some people, I am team, go back to the office. But I think I see life through the lenses of who I am, what I like, what I need, and mental health. Sincerely, I do believe in the more productivity. I was talking to a school director. She says she's far more productive. She's up at 5 in the morning, 5 a.m. and like to exercise. She's like, no, I open my laptop, I start working, I start reading, and then she goes to bed. I've been with her teaching all the way until 8 p.m. No, of course you're more productive, but also, right, like you now have the opportunity to work longer, as you said. And if you happen to be passionate about your work, it is not that simple to say I'm done for the day. So yeah, I think that has been a huge subject of conversation, especially now that we're finally fully post pandemic,
Mhm.
and people are thinking like, what do we do with these buildings? What do we do with like what are we doing? So I like your approach of how do we make this work. I think questions like open ended like that, it brings possibilities and allows for freedom and flexibility for people to think. And personally, as I'm coaching people, like for her, it's like, what do you make? What do you need? And she came up in this call with so many ideas of like, maybe it's going back to conferences. Maybe it's going back to a few colleagues and saying like, hey, can we work together to get the office? Separate but together, right? Like just reaching out to people and making it work for her. So she's taking on not so much waiting for leadership. Well, she is it, but not waiting for I don't know, things to trickle down so that you're like, oh, okay, so I'm told now this is what I have to do, but sort of asking themselves, like people working in the workforce, what do I need? And how do I advocate for myself?
Yeah, and like one of the ideas I'm most passionate about is what about the people that do the work? Let's ask them, what do they want to do?
Mm,
And the solutions can't just be like three options where it's like, well, you come into the office 3 days a week and you work like it can't be so rigid. People value autonomy, people value flexibility. They're not machines or robots. Again, we talked about the complexity of the human experience earlier and how complex people are and how they have personal lives. I can single out a very common situation, mothers, right, who have primary caregiving responsibilities.
mm,
Uh, do you know how inclusive it is to allow a woman to work from home? There's some caregiving responsibilities that she can take on throughout the day, during her breaks, before her shift, after her shift. Um, there's some ease to her day that you're bringing with remote work. And so that's just one simple example, but it's also a very inclusive practice for so many other reasons. And I think we'd be very ignorant to dismiss that. I think
yeah.
it's figuring out how we make it work for people, and it's not one single solution that's going to solve for that. And then to your idea around the human connection, we can build human connections in different ways.
Yeah.
This is an amazing human connection. I'm exchanging ideas with you. You're listening intently. When you share, I'm listening intently. There's other ways to build human connection. And if it's in person that we want to build those connections, they don't have to be in the office. It can be, you know what? Once in a while, I'm going to shoot an email to or shoot a Teams message or a text to one of my team members and go and have coffee with them at a convenient place. We don't have to go downtown, sit in traffic, park
Right.
and pay so many dollars to pay for parking. We can meet in a more local area, have a coffee, and build a connection that way. We can go for dinner or lunch. We can do these things. So we can be creative as leaders. I think
Mm.
that's what people are looking for leaders to do, anyways, to get creative and kind of meet the moment.
Yeah. Yeah. And I feel that that's what we lose the moment we start going to school, creativity.
Mm,
Like,
mm.
follow the rules, right? Do as we tell you, and this is what we are going to be teaching you and what you're going to be learning. And so it's I think this is shaking the matrix. We're just kind of like, whoa, what's happening? How do we do this now with our circumstances? Just closing, like I'm curious, has there been any influence in you, your team, your peers of coaching, being coach, like exploring your leadership through coaching for yourself, for your team? How advanced are we currently in, you know,
Yeah,
in the servant sector in terms of leadership, personal development for you mentioned it, right? It was your own personal development, the growth that you've done that has brought you to solidify your style and maybe show up to your team the way you're showing up and to social media the way you are. What is the atmosphere right now in terms of personal development coaching specifically, if any?
yeah. I don't know if I have like a true sense of what the atmosphere, the appetite is. I would say this. I think there's a couple of barriers, right? One is you don't know what you don't know. And if I think of like a leader today, um, their head's probably barely above water. You know, we're talking about burnout, we're talking about these things. So often, I don't think leaders take time to assess where they are, to think deeply about what the next couple of years will look like for them, to think deeply about their shortcomings, and to try and address those shortcomings through some sort of learning and development. I think there's also often, again, probably because they're too overwhelmed and busy. So the natural excuse is, I don't have time for it.
Yep.
But I think also there's like this really dangerous misconception that as a leader, you need to have all these answers. And so it's hard um, from an ego standpoint to say, you know what, I need help to solve this problem. I need help to develop this. And I've seen that way too often in leadership, and I've been guilty of that. And I will say, I worked with a coach myself, and it really kind of changed things for me. And I would say that's probably one of the events that led me to sitting here with you today. And so if there's anybody listening and on the fence, find those right learning opportunities for you. Coaching does cost money. Coaching may not be in the works for you right now. You may not have disposable income or potentially even time for it. But there are so many other opportunities. There's free content, there's audiobooks, there's books. Just don't neglect your own learning journey. Um, Push for others to grow, but don't forget that you need to grow yourself as well.
Yeah.
And yeah, coaching is definitely worth every penny that you'll spend, as long as you find the right person that can address those shortcomings. And if you can't find a coach, that's okay. Find a mentor. It's going to be free. Find a mentor, find somebody that will advocate for you, champion you, coach you. Um, Even if it's somebody that's like really close to you in your immediate circle, find that person. But do not neglect your learning journey.
I echo that. I'm biased, but I echo that. Um, Last but not least, what has been the impact of self-care for you as a leader? Like, is this something that you look at? How do you care for self? Is that a priority? Like, what does not burning out look like for you?
Ooh, I can't say that's one of my strong suits. I think I'm so dedicated to the work that I do and to the people that I work with that sometimes, that falls by the wayside. I've had some good moments. I've had some good moments. I really preach about work-life balance, and for me, what that looks like today is like spending quality time, downtime with my family, my girls, my partner, um, taking that 15 minutes once in a while to take a bit of a breather. I used to laugh at people that like do those breathing exercises. Today, it's really valuable to me. In fact, just before coming on here, I did a couple breathing exercises. Um, it's a choice, and especially as an introvert whose social battery is always very vulnerable, I make certain choices on weekends or on weeknights. Sometimes I don't see anybody. Sometimes I don't go out. I get invited to certain outings. I don't take the bite, and I'm mindful of my time. I would put it that way.
Wow, makes
And
me so
exercise,
happy.
exercise. I'm gonna pretend I'm super, super active. A bit of exercise once in a while really does the trick.
Yeah, I would say I echo, 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 echo. Made me want to do a dance. I did a bit of a dance to hear you say you used to make fun of those people, those the breathers. um, I remember. I obviously I'm not an introvert. I'm the complete opposite. I
I
am an
know. I
extrovert. I
know.
thrive on microphones and talking, and I talk too much. Like that to me, coaching is self-management of like all these ideas I have and just breathe. This is not about you, it's about the other person.
Mm,
I'm breathing, my friend, has breathing has managed my anxiety for one. Uh, has allowed me to lean into discomfort, which has made me far more successful than I would ever be because I just walk with fear. Fear comes with me as a pet. And
mm.
rather than waiting for fear, I was talking to somebody earlier today about this. I've never thought I'm gonna wait for fear to pass and then I'll do the thing. I'll jump on a podcast. I've just recognized fear is here and we're going together. Like my pet. I'll just like I think of it as a walking, my dog Karma. Just like we're going for a walk. She's coming with me and we're doing this together. And breathing has been the tool that I keep going back to. Like if I can manage my breath, I can manage my ecosystem internally.
Mm.
So then I can manage my words, or I can manage my mind, or I can manage my energy because I have a lot of energy. And yet I think most people describe me as calm. And I'm like, I am calm, but I also have all these energy inside of me. Right. So I can be incredibly grounded. But today you would have seen me today. I was walking like 3 feet above ground. I was so excited, so full of energy. I had one too many coffees for sure. And breathing is the thing that I go out to do. It's like, okay, I need to breathe. And yet I would have qualified myself as a person who cannot breathe because it's the
Mm.
complete opposite of who I am. And yet it's exactly what I need. So from all the tools, all the things that we said here today, your breath was born with you. If
Mm.
you're breathing, it's your lucky day, your life. Your
Mm.
breathing manages and communicates with your nervous system, tells your nervous system all is well, you're safe. If you can take prolonged breathing, or it tells your nervous system like run, something's up, and it's free. It's a free tool that help us truly manage that inner fear, whatever it is that's produced by. So that on its own
It's
is massive self-care.
it's such a powerful tool. It's undeniably powerful. And yeah, I'm disappointed in myself for waiting so long to embrace that. But I can tell you 1 minute of breathing, 2 minutes of breathing will
Yeah,
change the direction of your day, the trajectory of your day.
yeah, yeah. And how powerful for leaders to do that and
Mhm.
like showcase this even.
Mhm.
before talking. My friend, this was fun. This was calming. I really liked it. And my best wish for anybody listening is that if you have told yourself at some point that being quiet is wrong, listen, I've told myself that talking so much is wrong. I think that the lesson here is like learn more about yourself, know what you need, make it comfortable for you to be who you are, but do not stop advocating for yourself. Like still go for that leadership role. Still go, I guess, get through this comfort in the easiest, most loving way that you can so that you get to fulfill your full potential and not stay behind. Yeah, from a place of getting to know what your needs are and giving them to yourself. And that's what you've done. And so as you explained here so beautifully. So
Yeah, if closing thought would be if you're on the quieter side, there's nothing wrong with that. You can be immensely powerful as a quiet person, and there's a lot of comfort that comes from removing yourself or keeping yourself outside of social settings. But unfortunately, uh, realistically, if you want to seize opportunities, if you want to grow, you have to put yourself in uncomfortable situations. And so do a bit of work, figure out what works for you. There's so much materials out there. There's so much thought leaders that speak about this. Susan Cain comes to mind. There's so much amazing content out there to figure out how to navigate the world as a quiet person. And conversely, I'll say if you're an extrovert, uh, if you want to be an ally, create room for introverts to contribute, just like Olga did for me today, and um, and recognize that an introvert can be a very powerful ally. They have amazing ideas, and they can be very effective as well.
I echo that. Like some of the most you don't talk often, but when you talk, it's like, whoa, you've been keeping that inside all along. I would have yelled that a long time ago. Uh, yeah, that and sort of that's the benefit of being quiet. You have time to think.
Mm.
You don't regret so much what you say because it's well thought. You've given yourself that time, that patience to think it through. Where do people find you?
I'm a bit everywhere. I'm still growing as a creator and as someone that's putting his ideas out there. I think the most prominent platform for me right now, or where you'll find me more often, is on LinkedIn. Alain Hyppolite. Good luck trying to spell that. Olga will put in the description of the podcast. I can also be found on Medium. I write longer form content there. And of course, I have a website which Olga will share as well. You can sign up for a newsletter. I write the Saturday Power Move. Every Saturday, you get some actionable tips and strategies on how to navigate the world as a kind and quiet leader. And if you see my content, please don't hesitate. Comment, reshare, send me a message even. I'm very open to that. And I'm wishing you the best of luck on your journey.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. I'll see you guys next Monday for another episode.